So first of all, thank you, Yanto, for the invitation a few years ago now to co-edit this special issue for the Journal of Asian Public Policy. This is has been a really interesting adventure and has taken us through some interesting periods of history in both Hong Kong and in the US. But we have been victorious in the end. So thank you to everyone for their contribution. So the paper that I worked on with some co-authors looks at social enterprises in China with a view to thinking about how the strong institutions in China impact social enterprises and what social enterprises do in response so that they can maintain their identity. And we look at this from the perspective of social enterprises as institutional innovations in a very strict sense. So with that, I'm just going to move into my slides, and hopefully I can do this in 10 minutes. So there, and I'm apologizing up front because there's a lot of background that goes behind each of these statements. I'm not going to be able to pull out all the evidence behind these statements. So read the paper, I guess, if you want to know how these statements are supported. So the first one is that Western-based social enterprises entered China with these strong macro institutional forces working against their survival. So when I say macro institutions, I'm looking at government, business, culture in terms of opinion, popular opinion, sometimes even, and in some cases, even civil society. And these, we're, as I mentioned, we're looking at social enterprises as institutional innovations in China in particular, that in fact are disrupting these macro institutions along certain dimensions, normative, cognitive, and regulative. And we get this definition of innovation, institutional innovation, from Raffaelli and Glynn, who have been able to operationalize this definition of institutional innovation. And in the first kind of stage of our work, we set out to find evidence that social enterprise in fact fits this definition of institutional innovation in China. And that piece is in the paper as well. So another piece of theory that shapes our thinking, high isomorphic pressures of these macro institutions urge legitimacy through conformity with existing institutions. But this act actually undermines these disruptions created by social enterprises. Those disruptions happen to be part and parcel of what their identity is wrapped up in. So it creates some problems for social enterprises. Our question here, I'm sorry to jump right into kind of more of a theoretical discussion, but it really is why we have the question the way we do. Sorry, let me go back. So our question then looks at how do social enterprises respond to institutional pressures working against the disruptions they create. So we, getting into more theory, we draw on Oliver 1991, and this is from the business literature, who theorized a framework to help explain the strategic responses of organizations and how they either resist or conform to institutional pressures based on institutional and resource dependency theories. And I'm not going to get into everything that she did and how she based it on those theories, but again, just moving forward to the most important. Oliver hypothesizes that there are 5 types of organizational responses to institutional pressures: acquiescence, compromise, avoidance, defiance, manipulation, and that there are also 5 antecedents of responses to pressures. So I'm going to talk about those 5 antecedents later. I'm not going to list them here just so I don't repeat myself. So we test Oliver's framework to determine whether it holds true in kind of a different scenario than what Western literature uses. The theory has been actually tested, a number of times, well, quite a few times if you look at the business literature. But no one has really tested it from these perspectives that we look at in this paper. And the first one is that we're looking at organizations that are strictly defined as institutional innovations. We are also looking at strategic responses of organizations under conditions of really strong institutional pressures. And also we're looking at this in the context of Asia. So we're really testing to see if her framework works in a very different setting than the ones that it has been tested in so far. Our methodology in 2016, my co-authors, both they're native to China, but working in the US, went to Shanghai and conducted 27 in-person semi-structured surveys of social enterprises. From those surveys, we were able to see that in our first stage of work, that these social enterprises met the definition of institutional innovation, and that in fact they were engaging in strategic responses related to cognitive, normative, and regulatory disruptions caused by the innovation that they were doing, which is that, of course, the combination of the social and the business within the social enterprise. Then in 2017, we conducted an online survey. We pulled together that survey based on the information that we got from our surveys in 2016. We wanted to expand the survey geographically and also to reach more for-profit social enterprises. Almost all of the social enterprises in our first survey were nonprofit social enterprises. We were able to, and I should mention that that online survey was posted to social enterprise intermediaries on their platforms in China. Several social enterprise intermediaries in China were willing to put a link to our survey on their platforms. So we had 100 organizations respond, and after data cleaning, we had 41 usable surveys. 22 were for-profit, 10 nonprofit, and 9 had registered as both for-profit and nonprofit. So in terms of our analysis, this took quite a bit of effort. We did a lot of coding and then analysis of the data. And so I'm just going to barely scratch the surface on what we did. We looked at institutional pressures on the establishment and operation of social enterprises. And so those institutional pressures were stemming from societal opinion, business, civil society, and government. And then we looked at the antecedents of social enterprises' responses to these institutional pressures. And then we looked at those organizational responses to each type of institutional pressure. And we have a lot of tables in our paper, so you can see how we coded everything in these 3 categories. And I'm going to pull up just one small table. And this is looking at business pressure. So I'm not going to really talk through this. I just want to point out that on the far left, we have the institutional pressure. In the middle are the institutional antecedents. And then on the very far right, you can see the social enterprise response. So this is how we set out our analysis. So we went through. So our findings, what we found was that social enterprises in China survive by resisting negative institutional pressures while simultaneously conforming with others for increased legitimation. So it's, and that might be a surprise to some people that there actually are institutions that are positive influences on social enterprises in China. Yes, indeed, there are. Some of these have a lot of international backing, actually. and legitimacy from international organizations. And so social enterprises in China draw from these organizations and gain legitimacy from them. And at the same time, though, they resist negative institutional pressures that would undermine their identity. And there's a lot behind that. I just couldn't get into all the details. So this confirms that the strategic response theorization holds true even with a social enterprise institutional innovation in an Asian setting with strong isomorphic pressures. And this holds important implications for social enterprise stakeholders in terms of the resilience of social enterprise in new settings that have strong institutional pressure. And this is really of interest to me because I look at social enterprise in different countries around the world. I'm very interested in whether or not they're going to be able to, over the long term, be sustainable in new places, just because there are very strong institutions sometimes where these social enterprises are going. And are they able to resist? Are they able to gain legitimacy and become institutionalized over time? And so this paper really helps us to kind of make a first step in that direction of saying that yes, even in some of the more harsh environments for social enterprise, they can find a foothold if certain things are in play. And then this last comment, we went ahead and did another paper after this one that looked at social enterprise intermediaries because they seem to be so front and center. And this was a comparison with India, so China and India. And we found that they play an important role in legitimizing social enterprises as well. And this paper was just recently published online in Public Management Review. So there's a next step to this research that you can look into if you're interested. Thank you.